Welcome to our afternoon session.
Hello.
I hope those of us who had a lunch, had a pleasant one. Now we return to something that is potentially going to be very exciting. With us we have Professor John Walton, Professor of Old Testament, Emeritus at Wheaton College, Illinois, in the USA. In the evangelical world, there are two topics that can potentially land you into trouble.
Only two.
Write something about Scripture. And if you're bolder still, write something about Genesis. Professor Walton has written extensively on the second of these hot potatoes. And his work has been highly acclaimed, including by a former Bishop of Durham, who may or may not have published a book called Surprised by Hope. Over to you, Professor Walton.
So the aforementioned Bishop of Durham will remain unidentified. We'll only call him by his initials, Tom Wright. Anyway. Oh my. Yeah. Well, it's good to be with you again. Thanks for coming back. And yes, perhaps you couldn't have imagined this possibility, but it's going to get even more controversial. But hopefully that will help it be exciting. I want to remind you what I've said all along, and it's especially important to hear again here, that I'm not presenting this information expecting that everyone in the room will accept my conclusions. I've had the privilege of developing an expertise of researching and being educated and reading, and it helps me to have information that not everybody gets a chance to interact with. And I'm very happy to come and put it in front of people so that they can consider it, to see if it will be important to them. And so that's the spirit in which I come before you. I bring information and tell you how that information affects conclusions that I draw. And it may or may not affect the conclusions you draw. That's okay. We're thinking. It's good brain exercise. Okay, so I hope you'll receive what I'll be talking about in that spirit. So this session, the main title is Cosmos as Tempo. You'll not see that on the slide. I instead put the subtitle on the slide, Wise Order, both divine and human. And both cosmos and tempo are where order comes into play. And so the big word for today, 4 hours worth of it, is order. Now, I noticed when I was looking at the table out there that there are a number of books by Jordan Peterson. I thought, wow. I don't know if there are big fans of Jordan Peterson here or not. But it's interesting. I haven't interacted with Jordan Peterson very much, but I've read enough of his work to understand that he thinks the word order is a very negative term. That order speaks of some person in power imposing their sense of order on someone who doesn't want it. I get it, but that's not what I'm talking about. The order I'm going to talk about is the order at the level that we all want it. We want our lives to not be chaotic, to not be just troublesome and problematic and distressed and anxious, right? Those are all kind of opposites. We want order. We want things to be working the way we want them to work. Life goes smoothly. Society runs smoothly. And that's the order that I'm talking about. So lest there be any confusion with Jordan Peterson, I am not Jordan Peterson. And yes. And so I wanted to make that clear because I don't want any misperceptions about the concept. Because order is the big deal that we're going to be talking about. Order, as best as I can determine it, is the primary value in the ancient world. It's what they valued above all else. It wasn't so much individual flourishing because, of course, they weren't individualists. They thought about order in society, in their families, in their clans, in their towns and cities, in their nation, in their relationships. And that's why we find a very important theme throughout ancient Near East, including the Bible, of wisdom. Because in their way of thinking, wisdom is the pathway to order. And that might help you understand wisdom a little bit as well. When we read the wisdom in the book of Proverbs, we can see that wisdom is the pathway to order. Order in relationships between husbands and wives, parents and children. How you work with other people in society. How you speak. How your tongue can be disruptive of order or bring order. And so the Bible, as well as the ancient Near Eastern literatures, promote wisdom because they see wisdom as an instrument, a pathway to order. And that's why I can talk about wise order. In one sense, that's an oxymoron. One assumes the other because they're so deeply connected. You can see the pictures I have on this first slide are just various snapshots of where we think about order. You know, the way that food grows. Wait, I've got a, there's that. Oh, here we go. Yeah, food grows. Then something as basic as our DNA. That's what brings order to our being. The United Nations. Order on an international scale, hopefully, theoretically, right? Village life, how the village operates, how society operates, all the way down to the cellular level and all the way up to the astronomical level. Order is what we see. Order is what we can appreciate. And that's what's being expressed in this verse that I drew, of course, from Colossians. For in him, of course, it's talking about Jesus. In him, all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. They are ordered. And so Jesus here is identified as the center and source of order. So that's the kind of order that I want to talk about. It's order that drives the concept of law, whether it's our concept of law or their concept of law. It's order that describes the created world. It's order that helps people understand how hierarchies work in society and the role that people play. Order is everywhere. And when it's disrupted, we feel it. There are some folks here from Ukraine, and order is being severely disrupted. And in a very different way, in the United States, order is being severely disrupted. And whatever country you're from, there are probably examples in your case as well. But it's not just the countries we live in. Sometimes we can experience this lack of order even in our families. We talk about dysfunctional families, families who have been apart and antagonistic. And it's order that we seek. Reconciliation can bring about order. We're going to find that lots of the terminology that we find in the ancient world, but especially I'll talk about in the Hebrew Bible, are words that pertain to order. One of them you know very well, shalom. Shalom is in the order spectrum. It's talking about things being as they should be, that they're not troubled by fear. To have shalom is to not be afraid. The word rest is in the order spectrum, and we'll talk about that at more length. But even words like good and evil, we often understand them as if they're in the moral spectrum. Not in Hebrew Bible, they're not. They're in the order spectrum. Good means that it is ordered and operating the way it should. Evil, ra, means that order is being disrupted, whether morally or some other way. Sometimes people are baffled in the Bible because it can talk about God being ra. You say, God can't be evil. We've made the mistake of thinking that ra is in the moral spectrum. It's not. It's in the order spectrum. And God can do disorder. The flood, where God disrupts what people have been setting up because it was not good order. It brought only violence. And so we have these terms that are really in the order spectrum. And we've often misunderstood them because we like to squeeze things into the moral spectrum. It's kind of a comfortable space for us post-Enlightenment. Okay? And it's another place where we have to look back in the ancient world and say, wait, what are they talking about? How do those words resonate with them in their system? So that's just to set the table a little bit for the things we're going to be talking about. Some of you know, if you've done any reading about Egypt, one of the principal elements and goddesses in Egypt is Ma'at, order. That's her. And they've got a god representing that. So we're going to see then that this is one of those things. We've talked about things that Israel shares with their world and things that they don't. This is one of the things they share with the world in which they live. Order is the highest value. For us, it's a very high value, but it's not the highest necessarily. For in the United States, probably people would say personal rights is the highest value. And sometimes, of course, your personal rights might disrupt someone else's order. So be it. It's all about me. Okay? You feel like you get the drift of this, because I'm going to show you how this permeates all that we're doing here in these chapters. I suspect most of you were here yesterday, and so my next slide was kind of just repeating, just in case there were those who were not here yesterday, that our target is understanding the authority of the text. Okay, you remember this slide? I won't ask who was here and who wasn't here, but most of you look familiar by now. Okay, so if authority is vested in the author, then the Bible's claims must be understood not only linguistically and literarily, but contextually. You remember that? Contextual means language, literature, culture, theology, and history. Those are the 5 basic building blocks of context. Okay, and that's why I say that the Bible is written for us, not to us. Okay, and so we want to understand what was written to them. Therefore, we have to minimize the lens of our own culture. This is just reviewing what I told you yesterday. Minimize the lens of our own culture and ask how they would think about, in this case, creation. Now, another review slide here. Okay, remember the backpacks. Okay, here we're specifically dealing with that red backpack. You know, I like this slide. It's so colorful, and it's the backpacks. The first time I thought of the backpack analogy, I was teaching somewhere, and I thought of the analogy, and I used it, and I liked it, and it worked. And I was leaving that conference and walking through the airport, and there was a store that had backpacks for sale. There it was, right in the airport. I whipped out my phone, took a picture, and now that becomes my PPT slide. I love it. Anyway, it's so colorful. But anyway, remember the backpack issue is that key big concepts are things that we think of in particular ways, and other people might think about them in very different ways. Okay, so when we talk about history or law or marriage or time or identity, okay, that label is on the backpack, but what's in our backpack? In our backpack are all the things, cultural things that we think about, and that's probably not the same as what's in their backpack. So in this session, we're going to apply that specifically to the red backpack here, to creation. So we've got our backpack that says creation on it. And if we kind of take that off and empty it out and take a look at what's in there, okay, there are all kinds of things that we associate with creation. Lots of them have to do with science. Lots of them have to do with the way we see the universe. Big Bang cosmology, those kinds of things, long periods of time. And so the way we think about creation is all in our backpack. But we have to ask what's in their backpack. It's still got creation on it. But what are the things that come to their mind? It's not Big Bang cosmology. Okay? There's certain things that come to mind. And we have to try to understand their backpack. What does the act of creation constitute? We think there's only one answer to that, because we think that the act of creation is typically a material act. God's creating objects. Duh, right? I mean, that's so intrinsic, so much a part of our backpack, we don't even realize that somebody could think differently. But we can't be so confident in ourselves. Try another one. What constitutes existence? You say, what? Yeah, what do we mean when we say something exists? What criteria establish existence? You say, boy, that sounds like a very philosophical question, and it's after lunch, and I'm already, and I'm not sure I'm ready for that. But I'm not trying to pursue it philosophically, just practically. In our backpack that says existence on it, one of the major things in there is the idea of materiality. Okay, so you would say, this microphone exists. How do you know? Well, I can touch it. I can see it. It's material, so it exists. And that sounds, that's obvious. Who would not think that way? In the ancient world, they don't think that way. The difference that we see between existence and non-existence is often a material line. Not material, then existence, material. And if creation means to bring something into existence, you can see where I'm going. In that kind of perception of existence, creation must be a material manufacturing process. But what if existence is thought of differently? And we're going to talk about that. That's all part of what's in the backpack. Because the backpack that says creation has a little lunch bag in it called existence. I just made that up. But so they're related concepts. And we have to carefully unpack the backpack. It was the late 90s, and I was standing in front of a class, teaching on Genesis 1. It was a Hebrew class, so we were going through the Hebrew text. And we were talking about day 1. And I brought to the class's attention something I'd mentioned in many classes previously. I said, this is really strange because on day 1, it says, God said, let there be light. And then as it goes on, it says, God called the light day. So this is so familiar to us that we don't even stop to ask, isn't that a little weird? Why does he call the light day? Why doesn't he call it light? What's going on here? Did you ever think about it? It just flows right past us, right? So what God is creating is day. There already was night, darkness. God's creating day. Well, that's nothing material. And then I said the line that I had never gotten so far as to say. I said, what kind of creation account is this anyway? 20 years of teaching Genesis. I had never asked the question because I thought I knew, because I thought there was only one answer, because I was stuck in my own cultural river. I was lost in my own backpack. And I never asked the question. In that moment, I'd had 20 years of preparation, reading the text of Genesis, evaluating Hebrew terms, reading the ancient Near East, understanding sort of what we have in that literature, and all those pieces have been kind of sitting out there bumping into each other in my brain. And the minute I asked that question, what kind of creation account is this anyway? The Rubik's Cube all came together. I had finally asked the right question. And I had been sufficiently prepared that I could then see the direction that the answer would take, for me at least. We often think that there's really only one way to answer that question, but I want to use an illustration that'll help you to see how we might have several different ways to think. So we're going to talk about bara, the Hebrew word translated create. So imagine that there's a play downtown, and it's a play that you really want to see, but the tickets are really, really expensive. And so you're thinking, oh, I'll never get to see that play. And then somebody gives you free tickets. You say, oh, this is wonderful. I'm going to get to see the play. And so the day comes, you're very excited, and off you go to drive downtown to see the play. And it's pouring rain, and so the traffic's a little slow. And then there's some construction, and it's even slower. And then there's an accident, and now you're all jammed up, and you can't get off the freeway. And then you finally break loose of the freeway, and you get downtown, and there's no parking spaces. And you're looking around for a parking spot. And finally, you end up at one that's a mile away, a kilometer away. And you park the car, and it's still pouring rain, and you plod through the pouring rain, finally get to the theater, and boy, you're just feeling horrible right now because you're so excited about this and everything's going wrong. And you walk into the theater and you find your seat, and of course it's right up front, so you disrupt everybody, and you slide into the middle of the row and knock over somebody's coffee and sit down in your seat, dripping wet, take a breath, and the lights come up for intermission. So, having disrupted everyone around you enough already, you figure, this won't hurt. Okay, so you turn to the people around you and you say, how did the play begin? One person immediately speaks up and says, oh, I can answer that. I said, the script that was the basis of the play was written in the 1930s. It's a wonderful script. It was gained great acclaim in Europe and in the United States. No. You say, I don't care about when the script was written. Oh, well, that's how the play began. Yeah, but that's not it. And somebody else chimes in and says, oh, you want to know about when this theater was built and this stage, because the play begins with its venue, the place where it's being set. It's all about place. And let me tell you about this. No, I don't want to know the history of the theater. I'm sure it's wonderful, but that's not what I want to know. And somebody else pipes up and says, oh, what you need to know is this set was constructed specifically in this theater for this play. And so this play began with this set being constructed. And you say, oh, it's a wonderful set. I'm impressed already, even though I just got here. But that's not it. And somebody else comes in and says, oh, you want to know about the cast, because the play, it's really the people. It's about the people. And this play began with the choosing of an appropriate cast for this. You say, no, please, will somebody just tell me what's happened since the curtain opened? I love that illustration, because as you can see, all of those are right answers from a certain perspective. They prioritize different things, but they all are defensively an explanation of how the play began. Where the person asking the question, there you are, dripping wet, asking the question, you thought it was pretty clear there was only one answer to be given. But yet, other people had different perspectives on how the play began. Now, I love this illustration because it's very much the same when we ask, how did the world begin? There's not just one answer. I mean, we can say there are plenty of wrong answers out there, but I'm not talking about that. We don't talk about the turtle that found a seed and put it on its back. Okay. I'm not talking about those kinds of things, but the perspective, the angle at which the beginning of the world might be addressed. How did the world begin? We have a basic way of answering that in our backpacks. And we talk about science. And we talk about materiality. And sometimes we talk about theology. Those are things in our backpack. But remember that we have to accept the Bible on its own terms. Authority demands it. We have to accept the Bible on its own terms. We don't want to press ourselves into the Bible. We want to allow the Bible to press itself into us. It's a way to think about all your Bible reading, all your Bible encounter. So we need to know what's in their backpack. And we're not necessarily going to get that very easily just by reading the Bible more. There are some hints there, but we're not going to pick them up very easily. And I'm going to show you where we have some of those. But we also find information from the ancient world that helps us to know how everybody in the ancient world was thinking. And I hope to show you that there's good evidence in the Bible that Israelites were thinking in those same ways. And I don't mean about which God created. Of course, Israel had a different idea of that than the people around them. I'm talking about what they think about what creation is. What existence is. In those terms, they thought a lot like the people around them. Just they thought their God had done it and some other features along the way. So we're going to try to understand how the Israelites would answer the question, how did the world begin? What's the story of this place? How did the world begin? Well, what's the story of this place? Just another way to frame the same question. When I was teaching, my wife and I had a practice that all of my classes would be invited over for dinner every semester in groups of 10 or 12, just a little at a time, so we could get to know them outside of class. And we'd gather around in our living room or around the dining room table, have a meal, and just kind of share life a little bit outside the classroom. So it wasn't that unusual a thing. We'd be sitting around in the family room, and someone would ask, well, tell us about your place. Now at that point, what do they want to hear? Tell us about your place is a little bit vague. What are they looking for? Are they looking for how the house was built? Do they want to know about our electricity and plumbing and HVAC? The foundation. What's the foundation made of? How about the roof? What kind of roof do you have? No, they don't want to know that. Really, they don't. I didn't even have to try it. They don't want to know that. When they ask about our place, they're not asking a house story. When they ask about our place, they're asking about a home story. Tell us about your home. Tell us about your living space here. For example, in one house that we had, there was a room that was just off the kitchen that clearly had been built to be a formal dining room. It had the chair rails halfway up the wall. It had a chandelier hanging from the ceiling. It was built to be a dining room. We didn't need a dining room. There was a nice eating kitchen area. That was fine for us. And so we said, so we don't need to use that room for a dining room. So we decided we were going to use it as a den. We put the computer in there and some bookshelves, a futon, and we used it as a den. We furnished it as a den. We called it a den. It was a den. We created a den. That's home story, not house story. In the house story, it was a dining room. The home story, it was a den. I would suggest to you that the story of building a house and the story of making a home are both creation stories, just with a different focus. A house is the structure that you live in, and somebody had to build it. It's a physical, material structure. But a home is where your story comes to life. That's something more nebulous, but no less real. A home is where your story comes to life. Okay, full disclosure, I got that line from a real estate commercial on TV, but I really, really like it. It really works. I mean, yeah, right? I mean, okay. You see the difference, though. And both of those are creation stories. A house story and a home story. So we could ask the question, are the Israelites more interested in a house story for the cosmos? Or are they more interested in a home story? There are two possibilities. They're among others. What kind of story are they telling? And by the way, that's important. This is not a question of theology. That is, what are all the things that God made? It's not answering that question. Okay? God made everything. Okay, let's settle that. Material, house, home, every way, everything, God created it. Okay, we've got that covered. Now, let's talk about what story they want to tell. Because that's what we're talking about. This is a literary question. What story do they want to tell? Just like with how did the play begin? What story did each of those people want to tell? Different stories, different perspectives. When we're examining Israel's backpack, that's what we have to ask. What is the story they want to tell? And is it a house story or a home story or something else? So the house story focuses on material objects. That's kind of the thing in our backpack when we talk about creation. Science tells a house story. And we're comfortable with science. And science has persuaded us that we should think of creation in house story terms, in material terms. The home story, in contrast, is a story about functional order, how things work, what is their role, what is their purpose. A home story is an ordering story. When you first move into a house, regardless of who built it and when, you're going to have your pile of boxes that you just moved in from somewhere else. You're going to have the jumble of furniture all scattered about, and you're going to make it a home. Create a home by arranging the furniture, unpacking the boxes, most of them. That's one box that just always, it never gets unpacked. But at any rate, unpacking the boxes, putting things in cabinets and closets, everybody getting their place. We've moved several times, and when we look at a new place, it's a little different than most families. My wife will be the one who's going around in the basement looking at the foundation and trying to scope out the roof and looking at all the connections into the box of electricity to see if everything looks new and good, checking what the pipes are made of. And I would be walking around with the kids saying, which room are we going to have? What's my room? Okay? House and home. House and home. So they're two different stories. They both pertain to the place, just like the cosmos is our place. But we can think of the cosmos in terms of a house story or in terms of a home story. Both can be correct. They're not mutually exclusive. They're not in conflict. Now let me extend that analogy to another step. Think about your workplace. Okay? What's more important for understanding your workplace? Think about, again, going in, first day of a new job. What's most important? You sit down at your desk, okay, here's my desk, and say, give me the architectural plans for the building. I want to see it right now. How can I understand my work if I don't know the architectural plan of the building? That would be silly. Nobody would do that. You want to know the organizational chart for the business, right? Who do I report to? Who reports to me? Who's in charge? Who writes the checks for my pay? Right? How do things work? Order within the company. That's what's important for doing your job. You could go years and not see the architectural plans and not care a bit. I use that as an illustration of how this contrast, house story, home story, how we really live that out in some of our contexts. When we think about, for instance, our place of work, we're much more interested in order, the order in the company, in the organization, than we are in the material trappings. So we should be able to understand this, that that's of high significance. It's just the Israelites think of the whole cosmos that way. The organizational plan, not the architectural plan. See how that changes things? I'm reading enough in your eyes that it seems to me that you're getting it. The ones that are open, at least. Okay? Is this keeping you perky after lunch? We all right? Yeah? Keep that brain working. So let's extend that a little bit more, this working place analogy. So, welcome to your new job. We're glad you're here. Let me help you get settled in and get oriented. Okay? What are the things you talk about? Well, these are your hours. This is what you're going to be working. Okay, here's your office. Okay, your little cubicle. Yeah, I know it's small, but keep working through the. Okay, there's your office. Let me show you the break room. And here's where you can store your food and get some food. And these are the hours the building's open. And by the way, some holidays it's closed. And so you won't have to come in here for work. And let me show you the supply closet. You'll really love the amenities here. We try to keep you well supplied. And let me introduce you to your team. Here's who you will supervise. And, with all of this, never forget the big picture. Never forget who you work for and what the company's all about. Keep that in your mind. Now, there's your orientation to your new job. Makes sense, right? Familiar, right? Wow. In the beginning, God created heavens and earth. Welcome to your new job. Welcome to your place. Let me tell you about it. You can see the matchup. Each day, what it deals with. Orientation. Orientation. A better description than origins. Beginnings. Beginning of a new job. Beginnings bring orientation. A different backpack item than scientific origins. Right? You see the difference. It does not compete with scientific origins. It's just a different perspective. Genesis 1 is introducing humans to their workplace and their job. It's orientation. Now, I've only been using this slide for about 2 or 3 months. I just thought of this recently. And just today, as I was talking, I thought the word orientation really works well here. It's going to be on the slide next time I show it at another place, because that helps us to think about it. Orientation to our place. Doesn't that make a lot of sense? Can you see how that's something that someone would want to know? Orientation to our place, our job. Because that's what the test is going to tell us. It's going to tell us about our place and about our job. That makes it much more like a home story than a house story. So, Genesis 1 and order bringing. Now we've got enough terminology, enough ideas, enough perspectives on the table that we can now talk about coming at Genesis 1 with a different mindset. Thinking about what it's doing and how it's doing it. And part of this proposal is the idea that for Israel and for everyone in the ancient world, existence was not tied to material, it was tied to order. And to bring something into existence meant to give it a role and a purpose in an ordered system. If it's not order, it doesn't exist. It's hard for us to wrap our brains around because we just don't think that way. Nothing close in our backpack. But that's what I'm going to be suggesting that I want you to think about. For them, order bringing was creation. Because that's what makes something exist. And I'm going to be giving some evidence for that as we go along. So I'm presenting the option, the idea. The Genesis 1 creation is about order bringing when we actually dig into their backpack. Ready? Okay. So, I'm talking about Genesis as a home story. As a home story, a home is ordered. As I mentioned, that's part of the home story. Ordering, organizing, making it work, role and purpose. All of those things are involved in order. And the story begins with non-order. And you say, wait, no it doesn't. It begins in verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Yes, it begins in verse 1. What is verse 1? Some people have thought that verse 1 is an independent act of creation. God created all this heavens and earth in verse 1, and then come the 7 days. But the text doesn't give us that option. When we get to the end of the 7 days, it says, and so in the 7 days, God created the heavens and the earth. That means that the 7 days is when God created the heavens and the earth, not in verse 1. And that means that verse 1 is not the statement of something happening. Verse 1 is a statement of the story he's going to tell you. It's a chapter heading. It's an introduction. It's literary in nature. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Let me tell you how he did it. Right? So, he didn't do it in verse 1. He's doing it in the 7 days. So, verse 1 introduces the story, but it's not the beginning of the story. The beginning of the story is verse 2. And in verse 2, we have this state of existence, or non-existence, that's described. So, we read our chapter heading, and we begin the story. Verse 2. Now the earth, wait, earth? Where'd that come from? What's up? Okay, never mind, go on. The earth was tohu vavohu, however we're going to translate that. Darkness was on the surface of the deep. The deep? What's the deep? Where'd that come from? Isn't it odd that the story begins with matter already there? The earth is already there. Doesn't say how it got there. Doesn't say who made it. God did, by the way. Oops, spoiler alert. Okay? But remember, this isn't a theological type question. This is a literary story. So, if it's going to tell you the story of order bringing, it doesn't start with no material. It starts with no order. And so it's got the non-ordered earth that's covered in sea, because the sea is the ultimate expression of non-order in the ancient world. So it starts with non-order. It doesn't start with no material. And it tells us that it's starting with non-order by those words, tohu vavohu. Now, vohu we don't know very well because it only occurs 3 times and it's always with tohu. So we don't really know that one very well. But tohu occurs 23 times and gives us a number of contexts. And basically, tohu doesn't mean without shape. That's sometimes the impression we get when we hear formless. Formless, so it's without shape. It's putty. It's a bunch of clay. It's just hasn't. No, that you're thinking too materially. Okay, tohu means without order, without function, without purpose. Tohu is non-order. Non-order in this case, sometimes it's called chaos. I don't like that term as well because we think of chaos as a negative almost evil term. And tohu is not that. It's in the order spectrum, and it's the absence, the negation, the absence of order. That's tohu. Sometimes that can come about because order hasn't been established. Sometimes it can come about because there's been disorder and order is gone. Things have devolved into non-order. Non-order, tohu, is the default state. Everything's moving toward non-order unless somebody's stopping it. It's kind of like the laundry and the dishes in your house, okay? It's always moving toward non-order unless somebody stops it, okay? And so in that sense, non-order is not evil, it's just not worked on yet. It has to be ordered. And ordering is not a default, it has to be done. And that's exactly what I propose creation is in this account. So it begins with non-order, tohu. That's not tofu, by the way, although there are similarities. Okay, so into this tohu world, this non-ordered world, and again, it doesn't talk about how it got there. It starts with this non-order, which, by the way, all ancient Near Eastern creation narratives do. They think the same way. They're all home stories in the ancient Near East, all of the creation narratives. And so God creates, that's bara, but the more common verb is asa, to make. And, okay, how many of you studied Hebrew? Some, not too many. It's the verb asa, which is sometimes translated make and sometimes translated do, which is weird because those are different kinds of things. But at any rate, when asa is being used, from our backpack, when we hear about God making things, we pull the material thing out of our backpack again. You make material objects. Okay, but that's not how asa is generally being used. Asa talks about forming the identity of something. Making the identity. It's an agency word. God is the agent. You can be agent of making or an agent of doing. You can be an agent of making an object or agent of making something work. Okay, so making here, we shouldn't immediately think in material terms, but rather the idea that God is the agent bringing this about. And so making pertains to identity.
Can you give us an example?
Well, the word occurs 667 times. And sometimes it's translated provide, sometimes prepare. God makes each of our bodies, okay, which means God is the agent, but we know the biological process whereby we came about in our mother's wombs. And we can describe that. And we can still say it's the work of God because he's the agent, not direct agent, but indirect agent, ultimate agent. Okay, so it's just agency at any different level. God makes the nations. So there are all kinds of activities connected to it, and it's always pertaining to agency and often to identity. Of course, we have day 4. The heavenly lights are assigned a job, right? God made asa, the great lights. But again, don't think materiality, think designating to a task. He created them to do something. That's the ordering process. Here's a tricky one. In the ancient world, did they know that the sun, moon, and stars were material objects? See, that's something so automatic to us, right? Way in the bottom of our backpack, we never pull that one out to examine it. But they didn't. They didn't know that. If you would talk to Babylonians or Egyptians, they think the sun, moon, and stars are gods, right? They don't know they're material objects. And of course, God doesn't want Israel to think that the sun, moon, and stars are gods. So what do Israelites think of them? Exactly what the text says. Lights. God made, it's made there, it's asa. God made the great lights. That doesn't mean he made objects. Of course he did, but they don't think of it that way. Remember, this is a text that's communicating to Israelites. And so their concepts are what's on the table. And so when the text says that God made the great lights, they're not thinking he made this rock that's orbiting the earth and that reflects the light of the sun, or he made that ball of burning gas that gives us light and heat. Not in their backpacks. They are lights, and they govern. Lights that govern for signs and seasons and days and years. We're the ones that push materiality onto the text. We objectify creation because we live in a post-Enlightenment, scientifically oriented world. And that doesn't mean we're wrong. It just means we don't share this particular perspective with the Israelites. So the heavenly lights are made to be lights. And they're assigned to do what they're designed to do. Govern. That's a function. That's how they order life on this planet. Signs of the seasons, of the festivals, for days and years. Time measurement. So God is engaged in introducing us to our new workplace, about how it works, about how he has set it up to work, how he has ordered it. And those are acts of creation. I talked about the verb asa, the verb bara, to create. Also, you can do a study of that. That occurs 50 times. And you'll find that lots of times it does not pertain to material objects. For instance, in one text, God creates darkness. God creates the nations. God creates Jerusalem. These are not material objects. Bara is a word in the order spectrum. This is God introducing order. Asa is agency, bara is order. And you can bara something by differentiating it from something else. God separated. You can bara something by giving it a name, because a name designates its identity and its place in ordered, purposed world. You bara things when you order them, just like we created a den. We bara'd a den. So God is engaged in ordering the world for us, as a place for us to be, providing for us. Here's how food will grow. Grow, drop seed, grow, drop seed. It's how the system works. And God ordered it to be that way. God ordered day and night. It's how the world works. And what we find is that as God orders the world, he does not fully order it. It's good. Order spectrum term, that means it's ordered, functioning the way God wants it to. It's good. Okay, so it's ordered, but it's not fully ordered. How do we know that? Well, There's still darkness, but it's put in its place, separating day and night, right? There's still the sea, which is the basic reflection of non-order. But it's got boundaries that God maintains. Of course, thinking ahead to Revelation 21, in new creation, remember what it says? There will be no sea. You might have been confused with that in the past. I hope you're not anymore. That basically says it'll be total, complete order. That's in new creation. That's not at the beginning, that's at the end. New creation. There will be no darkness. See, the elements of non-order, no tears and suffering, elements of disorder, all of those will be missing. New creation is portrayed in fully ordered terms. But that's then. In creation, God brings order into the midst of non-order, but does not get rid of non-order. And then he does something absolutely astounding. He creates people in his image to be order bringers alongside of him. That's another reason we know that full order is not established here. Subdue and rule. That's the marching orders for people. They are image bearers in that because they are order bringers. That's what image of God is. It's not how you look. It's not how you think. It's not your psychological processes. It's not your philosophical abilities to perceive God or to be conscious of self. Image of God is none of those things that we moderns have made up. Image of God is described right here in this text. To be an image bearer means that you are created to do alongside of God what he does in creation and everywhere else. He is an order bringer. And we are his image because we are order bringers. Order bringer, order bringer. Image, likeness. We're created to that task. And then we're mandated that task. Subdue and rule. So humanity is an order bringer. Image bearer equals order bringer.
So creator?
Creator is order bringer. And we are delegated to work alongside, presumably, to bring God's order. No spoiler alert here, but you know what's coming. Now, one other point before we leave that thought. Oh, sorry, wrong way. Image implies relationship. That is, if we are supposed to work alongside of God to bring his order, that creates a relationship. We are his co-workers. So this helps us understand creation, it helps us understand the image of God, it helps us understand our task in the world, and to help set up kind of launching into the rest of the text of Genesis. So the image of God implies relationship. And of course, relationship becomes one of the key themes throughout the rest of the Bible. Whether we talk about the covenant relationship between God and Israel, or we talk about the relationship provided for all of us in Christ, or the relationship of the church to the body of Christ, relationship is a key theme in the rest of the Old Testament. And it's set up here in Genesis 1. God has created us for relationship. He didn't create us to meet his needs. He didn't create us because he was hungry and didn't feel like growing his own food. He created us to be in relationship with him. Now it's expressed right here. And so no surprise that that comes at this point in the creation narrative. People now created. Their place has been established. It's ready to work for them. And now they're put in place. So here's your new job. Here's your new place of work. Here's your new job. Subdue and rule. Bring order, God's order. Now, not only do we have relationships set up here, but we also have something else important set up, but I think now's a good time for a break, and I'll come to that one. So take a 5-8 minute break, and then come on back.
Just a little brilliant takeaway. Who's part of your co-workers? The sun, the moon, and the stars.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
That's brilliant.
Yeah. Good work up there, guys. Keep it up.